Welcome to a workshop offered by the University of Kentucky and the Office of Work, Life, and Benefits. Today, we're going to be talking about navigating the sandwich generation if you're caring for loved ones, children, as well as older aging loved ones. And so we are here just excited to hear from our speaker, Dr. David Weisenhorn. He works here at the University of Kentucky. He can tell you a little bit more about himself. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Azada. Thanks so much, and thank you all for coming and attending. It was nice to look in that chat real quick and see some of the reasons that brought you in. And whatever the reason, I'm really glad you're here. I'm glad. Hopefully, you get to share a little lunch, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So, I am a senior specialist for parenting and child development, and that's in the Department of Family and Consumer Sciences Extension. For those of you that aren't familiar with Extension, it's kind of in the title. It is the what I'll call the arm of the university that extends into across the state, into all corners of the state to bring that research, evidence-based information to all constituents, regardless of their ability to come to the university. And so I'm excited today to share a little bit of knowledge that I've gained, both research-based and personal, um, on navigating this sandwich generation. I hope that in what I share, you're going to hear those research findings, but that you'll also hear some of the ways that are described, some of the common struggles or challenges that sandwich generation adults face, as well as the unexpected gifts that come in this time, and some ways that maybe navigate that murky water if it feels that way to you. Or I even saw some people saying there's an expectation that this is coming, which hats off to you all because it is. In just ways that we can preserve our own health and quite frankly, our sanity. So, as someone in that, I say we because I'm in this sandwich generation. I have two amazingly rambunctious and energetic teenagers. Zeta, I can't I can't believe that I actually can say that I have two teenagers now. I have a son. Well, and technically, my son is 12, and in 2 weeks he'll be 13, but he's been acting 13 for about 2 years. So those of you that have teens probably can feel that. And then I have a 15-year-old daughter who is really enjoying the fact that she scares me daily, trying to learn the navigating the streets of Lexington, Kentucky, now that 15 is the new driving age. But like myself, many of you are probably finding yourself having to care up and down your family tree, and maybe feeling probably like I did, which was stretched thin, maybe a little guilty, exhausted, and certainly overwhelmed at time. My mother had a massive stroke in September of 2021 that rendered her 100% disabled or dependent. And she allowed my father, my siblings, and I to care for her for 16 months before she died on January 20th of 23. And I hope today to share some of my story, accompanied with those research, to find out what does research say about it, but also just to share some personal story for no other reason than to offer some encouragement. Maybe somebody can say, "Hey, I'm not alone. Man, that guy has it too." But I want to say that I am by no means the stop end all. This is the guy that's bring me the most knowledge. By all means, continue to research, continue to find out what other sources say. And as maybe your experiences with being in that sandwich generation, um, maybe it lends you in a different way. Maybe your circumstances are different. And so I want to acknowledge that my circumstance with being in this space is may not be your situation, but I hope that my experience brings some light to you and brings some encouragement to you. And again, I will leave enough time at the end so that we can ask questions and maybe even just have conversation, because I love dialogue. As we get going, I'll start with the obvious. What is the sandwich generation? And I think many of you probably know, as it kind of maybe you can see it in your mind when you think of the word, but The ultimate definition is that these are adults who have a parent age 65 or older and are raising at least one child younger than 18 or providing financial support to an adult child. It's interesting because I think that last piece is important as we begin to live longer than we ever have, and as the economic world state of our economy changes. I think we're all trying to figure out financially how things work, and so I think it does leave a lot of parents. I saw one engaged in the chat there, and I think that definitely puts you having two adult children, but still having them in home and caring for adults. I think that puts you right in this sandwich generation. And what's interesting about that is Pew Research shows that 23% of adults actually meet that criteria, having an adult who's 65 years or older and raising at least one child under the age at 23%, so nearly one in four. But I think what was more interesting to me when I read the research was that it said 54% of adults in their 40s, Americans in their 40s, I'll say. So over half of us who are in our 40s are in this situation. So that alone tells you you're not alone, but in some ways it doesn't offer a whole lot of encouragement other than you're not alone. And as you continue to read that research, it says, yeah, well, not hard to believe those that are in this sandwich generation have higher stress levels of stress and definitely have higher time constraint. And one of the reasons they suggest that's the case is because this caregiver stress is what they call invisible. And I was thinking on that and wondering to myself, what makes it invisible? Like why would we call this stress an invisible stress? And it dawned on me that probably many of us, if not most of us, have this ethical obligation or this moral concept that I'm going to care for my parents regardless of their situation and mine because that's what we do. We're family. Of course, I'm going to care for my family. And so, in some ways, it goes without really understanding what that means or how that's going to affect when coupled with caring for our own families. And so, what are some of those common challenges? Well, research is very clear and has been for years that chronic stress is one of those ultimate ends to this game is that it's so common that we all do it. And so what's chronic stress? How is that different? We hear stress a lot. How is that different? Well, that's just having that body stress response that's activated for weeks, not just hours or days, but for weeks and months and maybe even longer. And as you can imagine, when anything is running a red line, kind of like our car, when we're just maxing it out as fast as we can, that there's going to be some results to that are going to be damaging to the overall system. And chronic stress is no different. It leads to physical, emotional, and even mental problems. And so you can begin by having those headaches, and then all of a sudden it's depression and anxiety, and I can't get out of bed or I can't sleep at night. So you have all these sleep disruptions, insomnia is possibly there. And then ultimately that can lead to some cardiovascular strain or difficulties. And what was interesting about that is I watched this chronic stress and burnout occur in my own family. um, when my mother had her stroke and we realized that she was going to be 100% dependent, we very quickly decided, well, we are going to be the best caretakers that my mother ever had. And without a doubt, we wanted to take that on as a family versus giving that to the medical community, to the hospital, or to outside caregivers. And so for us, it felt like, hey, we can do this. We're going to do this. And so quickly, we moved my mother back into the home that her and my father were living. At the time, my father was 90 years of age. He's currently with us at 92, and it would be 93 this year. But as he was in this process, he was on board. He definitely wanted his wife in home and not in the hospital. And when we did that, we decided, okay, well, how are we going to do this? Well, let's get methodical. And we broke this down into a schedule, and we decided, hey, we're going to pull shifts. We're going to pull a daily shift, and people are going to be able to stop in during their day. And then in the evening, one of us will stay with mom and dad and be able to help out. Well, we quickly realized that someone was going to need to stay throughout the night because my father was able to identify my mother's needs at times. So again, 100% dependent. We are feeding her, we're bathing her, we're helping her to the bathroom, cleaning her afterwards. We're feeding and rolling her from side to side. We're adjusting her in her bed. We're getting her out of her bed and into a chair so that she can go sit in another room. And then we would oftentimes push her in a mobile chair as we would just get some fresh air around the block. And so a lot of this seemed very easy to do, and quite frankly, it seemed logical that we would be able to do that. I'm one of 11 children, which I understand is probably not the case for anyone that's listening. It's rather rare that you have that many siblings, and so with that number, we felt like, hey, we can do this. Very quickly, we realized that role overload was beginning to shift because my father wanted to maintain the dignity of my mother and not have her sons bathe and clean her. And so my sisters, as a result, picked up all of those shifts, if you will. And just like research shows, women are oftentimes the main caregiver. That's where that role overload kind of shifts. And what was interesting about that is there's no complaints among my sisters for this. There didn't seem to be any disruption. But as the months or the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, they realized this is not sustainable. We're not able to do this. This is requiring an awful lot of us. And the problem became that the guilt was in there that they didn't really want to say that because how that might look or feel. And for them to maybe even say it didn't feel right with them. It didn't sit right because the love was there, but there was that strain that was adding on to this. Now, being one of 11 children, it's important to say that many of my older siblings, I'm number 10 in the lineup, being the youngest son and having a younger sister. Many of who were older than me, they were not in that sandwich generation. There was only really two of us that fit that description in there. But yet their caretaking still disrupted much of their day-to-day life and was kind of leading to that emotional strain and leading to some of those guilts that were becoming more obvious in the ways that they were behaving around home and just in their day-to-day life. There's plenty of evidence that shows that financial strain is oftentimes linked to this. And so some of you may be feeling that if you're in this situation. For us, we were fortunate in the sense that one of my siblings is an auditor with insurance companies. And so she was well versed in understanding what insurances provide what and how Medicaid and Medicare. My parents were able to meet both of those standards, and so we were able to use a lot of those resources. Which, as you'll see in this presentation as it goes on, those are critical resources to have to be able to understand what are the resources available to us. And because of my siblings being versed in that, they were able to get that set up. And so financial strain wasn't it, but that emotional strain became evident in the fact that we were spending all the time. I mean, oftentimes hours, I mean, days and all night. Now, my mother at this time was beginning as most trauma to the brain is, it results in a lot of physical fatigue. And so my mom was very tired, and so she would sleep at most of the day. She was spending more time in the 24-hour period asleep than awake. And we were not quite sure how long that was going to be. And so again, feeling to bring her into the home was felt like that was the decision that we made based on our circumstances. And my mother would, so we started sleeping through the night. So one of us would begin to stay the night for 24 hours. We would have a vigil, and whoever was going to be there would be on call for the evening. And all of my siblings work. And so we all assumed it wasn't going to be much. Maybe we helped mom get up in the morning and get her dressed and get her taken care of. And then my dad at that point could kind of move her around in her chair, and he was willing and wanting to do that part, but wasn't able to lift her at all. And so we were really there for that heavy lifting. But what happened because of that trauma in the brain is that my mom's circadian rhythms became way out of sync. And so she would want to be up and awake and very alert, what we would call for her very alert at 3 o'clock in the morning, when most of us were trying to get some sleep so that we could be better in the day. And what happened very quickly is that we realized we could not keep up this rhythm. We couldn't, because the strain was too much, and that emotional strain led into that family conflict. And I say that, let me get a little sip of water here, because that was what I sensed a lot. Now, one of the things that made this unique for me is that I'm here in Lexington, Kentucky. My parents live outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. And so they're an 8 hour drive from me. And of my family, of my siblings, the 11 of us, seven of us, seven of them lived right around my mother. And so there was seven people that were always picking up a shift and leaving the four of us who were not local at all. What we would do is often call all the time just to find out how mom was doing. And my stress levels were high because I couldn't be there all the time. And I didn't have the time to take off work and didn't know when to be there. And so what I would do is I would call to find out, hey, how's mom? And I would call different siblings because I really wanted to hear how everybody was kind of handling the situation. And what I would hear oftentimes was that conflict. Oh, so and so didn't pick up a shift, or so and so's not coming by very often, or I don't get to see why, I don't know why he's not helping out, and I don't know why she can't come. And it was evident to me that the burnout was happening. And what was hard was I was so far away. And so I realized that the barriers there, sometimes the distance, while I wasn't actively engaged daily, I was mentally, and it took its toll as well. And so as that conflict happened, what was interesting about the conflict, though, I want to say this, is that my family never allowed it to get to my mom. It was never bitter. My dad actually said that. He said, it was amazing that the kids never fussed about having to be there with mom. Everybody that went did that. And so one of the ways that the four of us were able to help with that was that I would take a weekend. I would take a 4 day, and I would drive to North Carolina, and I would block 72 hours, and I would be the caretaker for 72 hours to allow that respite from my other brothers and sisters, which tend to be a blessing and really was helpful for them. And of course, I got to see them a little bit, and I got to spend more time with mom and spend more time with my dad. And so, what was interesting about that family conflict was that it actually showed me a lot of what that unexpected gift was in getting to truly see the best in my siblings. I was able to see something in them that I would not have been able to see otherwise. And that was a real gift, a real gift. So, some of the other research states that sense of purpose and meaning are something that come around. And I tell you, it was for sure something that occurred in my own life of just trying to think, man, to have a mom stroke at the end and be like, man, this is the way you're going to go out. That wasn't the best ending that I would have written. But as that 16 months went on, it turned into a real gift of being able to make purpose and sense of it. And so that was by far, I feel like, was upholding a lot of what the research was indicating was going to happen. The second piece of that here in those unexpected gifts is that intergenerational connection. It was a real opportunity for my children to begin to see what it was that caretaking was all about. They got to see dad taking care of his parents, and that was real important because I was able to say, hey, this too may happen as we age. This is the process. And my kids really got to see it as a parenting and child development specialist. I get asked multiple times in multiple places, how do I teach my children empathy? How do I get that across to them? And empathy is interesting because it's that understanding is placed or is located in our prefrontal cortex, which we know by research doesn't really come fully until we're now saying 26 to 30 years of age. And so fully developed prefrontal cortexes aren't until late in life. But so many parents want their children to express empathy early in life. And one thing that research shows is that when we model empathy, children are more likely to identify it and then desire it. And so, what an opportunity, what an unexpected gift it was for me to be able to care for my mother and really my father. While the care was different, while it wasn't a dependent care, it was caring for him because we were caring for his wife. And it was beautiful for him to be able to see his children come and experience that, and my children to be a part of that and say, oh, this is kind of the meaning. This is how this all works together. So really interesting that intergenerational connection piece is oftentimes that unexpected gift. And there's another part in that that's really important, that we engage our children in that in that caretaking event. And what happened with my older siblings, I said they all have children, but the children were in their 20s and 30s even, and they would come and pull a shift, and they would read to my mother, and they would read to their grandparent, and they would spend time and tell stories and sit by the bedside. And so really neat to see that intergenerational connection. And then, as I mentioned, just the need for that modeling of empathy, that young children really have a real concrete understanding of what empathy looks like. What is this in action? We can talk about saying sorry or being sorry, but then when you actually get to see someone put themselves in the shoes of someone else and sacrifice time and resources, um, it really puts that into context for children. And research shows that that helps develop their pro-social skills. That it also helps later in life when they're having to understand responsibility and caretaking. So as we shift through this, one of the things that was interesting to me is that while burnout and stress are common, um, they don't have to happen as frequently as I think it does. In ways that we can do that were things that I watched, not only personally I had to do, but I also saw the shift in my siblings as to finally say, hey, and for me being, you know, 8 to 9 hours away, I had to really say, hey, what matters most right now? I can't do it all. I can't be there all the time. My father would call and say, hey, you need to come be here. And there might be other things that were happening in my home here away with my children and my wife that I just couldn't do that. And I felt in that pickle a lot. And so to me, it was like, what matters most? And the way that I did that is I used three ideas. I said, I'm going to base that on safety. I'm going to base it on connection and consistency. Is my family safe? Can I leave them in this situation? Are my parents safe? Can I leave them in that situation? And one of the biggest reasons I could say yes to that safety piece is because I had people I loved and trusted that were caring for my mother, and that was my own flesh and blood. Um, there was consistent care, and I was connected to my mother, and my mom and I had an amazing relationship, and I could hinge on that. And my father and I, we had open lines of communication with my siblings, and that was definitely helpful. Realistic expectations. I couldn't be there. I couldn't be what my children needed. They didn't need a perfect parent. My parents didn't need a perfect child. They just needed someone who was willing to come and get after it. And that's what I did, is that when I had the time, I was fully present in that time. Um, Having those communication, being clear and kind. And I think I was raised in a family. There's a lot of military in my family. My father was military. I'm military. Several of my siblings were military, and so clear and direct communication was probably never an issue. But that kindness thing, now that oftentimes was a hinge point, right? That I can be really clear and direct, but a lot of times that tone or that directness has an edge to it that oftentimes left people hurting or cut. And so understanding that kindness, sometimes it was just being kind to my father in the way that I responded, and offering him more of um, that opportunity to come in to say, "Hey, Dad, how can I help you? How could I be helpful this weekend when I'm here? Are there things that you need me to do?" And I knew the lifting part and I knew the cleaning part was going to be my part, but there might have been other things in the home. And what I didn't want to do is assume that I knew best, that I was going to come in and do these things. And I think early on that was really disruptive in his home. And we got to see a lot of emotion from him. Part of it was because of the trauma of what was happening, but also because it was his space. And he had children come in, and all of a sudden now they're gonna take over, and this is what we're gonna do. And so we all had to kind of figure out that we had to do better at the communication piece. We had to do better at the kindness piece. Um, and being kind with yourself, I think, and understanding um, that the I should. And when I was a therapist, we say don't should on yourself. Like stop that with I should do this and I should do that. It's more about what's possible right now. Oh, I should be home with my mom, but that's not possible. I'm 9 hours away. I've got a daughter that I have to go and meet with her teachers, and I have a son that's got to get here to the doctor's appointment, and a wife who's got to be supported in these things. And so there was all kinds of, of variables that were keeping me from the I should. And so learning to get away from that language and understanding like what is possible right now was extremely helpful. Took a while to get there, if I'm honest. Share the load. Again, probably the biggest blessing of my story, and maybe one that might feel unfair to those that are listening, is just the fact that I had a lot of siblings that could carry that weight. We could take shifts, we could dice it up, and that was great. But as you can imagine, the more people in a system, the harder that system is to run. The more lubricant that's needed to keep it from squeaking and getting out of whack. And so it came with its own set of problems. But the reality is learning how to share that load. And if you don't have a lot of siblings, I think just leaning on those community, leaning on friends first and most, leaning on family if you have it. Some people don't have the resource of a healthy family. And so trying to lean into maybe a faith-based community, if you have one of those, and leaning into that community. I can't tell you how many times um, people have trauma or have life hit them real hard, and there's an opportunity of people waiting in the wings saying, "Hey, how can I help you?" And I think it's hard being on that end of saying, "Hey, here's how you can help me," is one, not being able to identify how can I be helped. Um, but really being able to trust and lean on people and say, "Hey, yeah, I need help." And so I think really important here that we learn how to delegate and share that load, even if it's with friends, or even our faith community of people we might not know. And then this slide here, before I get to the last one, is self-care. And listen, I know when this goes up, it's almost as if our eyes roll back in our head a bit. It's like, oh man, we self-care it to death. And we have since 2020 talked about the need to self-care. But part of this is, I think of it in like a three level. For me, this is how I had to do self-care. I had to make sure I got something daily. What am I doing for me today, every day? And I realized I mean, and science shows you this, that it's not self-indulgence. I have a picture here of that tub and that beautiful scene, and maybe somebody's picturing bubbles and a glass of wine and a candle and just feet up and look at me. It's all about me. But the reality is self-care is like eating. It's fuel. If you don't have it, the breakdown's coming. And so understanding what those micro daily doses are. What do I do? It's a 5-minute walk. It's a 5-minute meditation. It's a quick breathing exercise. It's consistent sleep routines. It's me being able to say, hey, I want to get into bed every day at the same time if I can do that. Um, and then you've got relational care. It's so funny how it happened in my own life. It was like, oh, well, my wife and kids, they love me. They're just going to have to understand that this is what I got to give here. But the reality is that's not how relationships work. When you neglect anything, it falls apart. And it really, there isn't anything that doesn't over time. And so it's important that we take the time to do that, maybe in those 5 minutes. And for me, it was on those daily walks. When I got a chance to get outside and I'd go on a walk, I'd call my wife, I'd call my kids, um, just to make sure I had some of that relational care. Touch base with a friend, let them know how it's going, how I'm feeling. The third one is structural care. And I think that's really important because what I'm talking about is boundaries, boundaries in time. How are we spending this? And when I thought about structural care, I think in some ways I could probably say that sleeping routine would go in there. But really, what I was thinking about was the conversation I had with my boss and saying, hey, this is what's happening. How can I set boundaries up at work to keep from one, dropping the ball? Like, I don't want to let you guys down. I know I still have to work, but man, my mind is occupied with this other thing. And it was my supervisor looking at calendars and saying, "Hey, okay, let's sit down. Hey, you know what? This block, yeah, you can take this. This time is good for you to block away. If you need to take 4 days, this would be a great 4 day for you to take. Hey, this meeting here, yeah, we could probably move that, or maybe you don't need to attend that. It'd be okay if that one wasn't one that you needed to attend if you need this extra time." And so for me, it helped to be able to say, here are some structures that are going to care for me and take care of me so I don't have to worry about letting down coworkers. I don't have to worry about am I going to get fired because of these things. And so understanding, defining maybe for yourself what those areas are and then how can you do that. And then the last thing I'll say, and we can get into a conversation, I'd love to hear responses or questions, is just that, hey, if you find yourself between the buns in this sandwich generation, if you're there, um, I kind of chuckle at that, and I really do. I think in some ways we are kind of in it. You're not failing if you feel overwhelmed, if you feel stressed. It's because it's a stressful time. Caring for two generations is a real exercise in love. And strength is not doing everything, it's knowing when to pause and ask for help. So you're allowed to ask, you're allowed to rest, and by all means, adjust those expectations because it's what's necessary and it's critical to your well-being. I thank you. Here are the references that I have for what I did today. And if you have any questions that you don't want to share today and want to contact me at a later time, I would love to hear from you. Feel free to reach it out right here.